The night was merciless. A storm raged over the city, drenching every corner with sheets of cold rain. Thunder growled in the distance as flashes of lightning illuminated the sky for brief moments. At the far end of a quiet street stood a grand mansion, its tall iron gates and polished marble walls glistening under the downpour. To any passerby, it was a symbol of power, wealth, and security. But just outside those gates stood a figure who looked as though she belonged to another world entirely. It was a girl, frail, barefoot, and trembling from head to toe. Her clothes were torn, clinging to her thin body, soaked completely through. Her hair was plastered against her pale face, and her lips quivered as she struggled to breathe in the icy wind. She pressed her small hands together, as though begging the storm itself to show mercy. She had been walking for hours with no destination, searching desperately for a corner to hide from the rain. Every shopkeeper had chased her away, every passerby ignored her existence, and every shelter she tried to approach was already overflowing. With nowhere else to go, she had wandered into the wealthy neighborhood and found herself before this mansion. The sight of its towering gates and glowing windows seemed almost unreal, like a palace from a storybook. Yet, her eyes were not on the golden lights shining from within, they were on the small wooden structure near the edge of the garden, the doghouse. Gathering the last of her courage, she approached the gate. The mansion's guard, a tall man in a crisp uniform, frowned as soon as he saw her. "Hey, what are you doing here?" he barked, his voice sharp against the roar of the storm. The girl flinched. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible, but full of desperate pleading. "Please, I beg you. Just let me sleep in the doghouse. Only for tonight. I won't cause trouble, I promise." The guard's eyes widened in disbelief. He let out a short, cruel laugh. "The doghouse? Do you know where you are standing? This is not a shelter for beggars." But the girl pressed on. Tears mixed with raindrops as they rolled down her cheeks. "I'll stay quiet, I won't touch anything. Just the doghouse, it's better than the street. Please." Her knees buckled slightly as if the weight of her hunger and exhaustion was dragging her to the ground. The guard shook his head and stepped closer, raising his arm to push her away. "Go, leave before I call someone. People like you don't belong here." And then, it happened. The sound of a car engine hummed behind the gates. A sleek black car rolled up the driveway, its headlights slicing through the storm. The gate slid open automatically, and out stepped a tall man in a tailored suit. He moved with an aura of authority, his shoes tapping against the wet pavement. The guard immediately straightened and saluted. But the man's sharp gaze did not linger on his guard. It landed directly on the poor girl, crouched near the gate with her hands clasped, trembling in fear. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The girl looked up, her eyes wide, shimmering with tears and desperation. The millionaire tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. The storm howled around them, but in that instant, the silence between them was louder than thunder. And with a voice calm yet curious, the man broke it. "Why, out of all places, would you beg to sleep in a doghouse?" The girl froze under the millionaire's question. His tone wasn't harsh like the guard's, it carried curiosity, almost disbelief. She lowered her eyes to the muddy ground, afraid to meet the gaze of a man who clearly lived in a world far above hers. I didn't mean to offend you, sir," she whispered, her voice shaking. I only wanted a roof over my head, even if it's small. Even if it's meant for a dog." The millionaire took a step closer, rain dripping from his umbrella. "You could have asked to come inside. Why would you choose a doghouse instead?" Her thin shoulders trembled. She clasped her hands tightly, as if holding her heart together. "Because," she hesitated, searching for words, "I'm used to being treated like less than human. Everywhere I go, people push me away, call me worthless, dirty, unwanted. A dog has more value than I do. At least dogs are allowed shelter." Her voice cracked on the last word, and tears spilled down her face, hidden partly by the rain. The guard glanced nervously at his employer, expecting anger. But the millionaire simply stood still, his sharp eyes softening, as though her words had struck something deep within him. For a long moment, the millionaire said nothing. The storm rumbled overhead, and the poor girl stood shivering, afraid her honesty had angered him. She expected to be thrown out just like always. Then, in a calm but firm voice, he turned to his guard. "Open the gate." The guard blinked, confused. "Yes, sir." "You don't mean..." "I said, open it," the millionaire repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, the guard obeyed. The tall iron gates creaked as they swung open, and the girl gasped when the man gestured for her to step inside. She hesitated, her bare feet trembling at the threshold. Never before had she crossed into such a world: polished pathways, manicured gardens, and glowing windows that radiated warmth. The guard muttered under his breath, "Why waste kindness on her? She asked for the doghouse." The millionaire's sharp ears caught the whisper. He looked at his staff with a faint smile. "Sometimes," he said, his voice carrying both authority and compassion, "a person asks for less only because life has never shown them more." The words hung in the air like a lesson carved into stone. With a gentle wave of his hand, he instructed a maid to bring the girl inside and prepare a guest room. The staff exchanged bewildered looks. A girl who had begged for a doghouse was now being welcomed into the mansion. The poor girl followed slowly, every step heavy with disbelief. Her heart pounded as the warmth of the house wrapped around her like a blanket. For the first time in years, she felt the faint spark of something she had forgotten even existed: hope. The dining hall glowed with golden light, the flicker of chandeliers dancing across polished walls. The poor girl sat stiffly at the edge of a long table, almost too afraid to touch the steaming bowl of soup placed before her. She had never sat at such a table before. The silver spoon in her hand felt heavier than stone, as though it belonged to another world. "Eat," the millionaire said simply, his voice calm but commanding. Her stomach growled at the aroma, yet her hands shook as she lifted the spoon. The first sip of warm broth sent tears spilling from her eyes. She quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. "You don't have to cry," the man said gently. "Just tell me, how did you end up here?" The girl hesitated, then lowered her spoon. Her voice cracked as she began. "I had a family once. My parents died in an accident when I was 15. After that, I worked wherever I could, cleaning, serving tea, carrying loads, anything. But people cheated me, shouted at me, threw me out. When I tried to sleep on shop steps, they kicked me away. They said I was dirty, a burden. Slowly, I started to believe it." Her eyes dropped to the tablecloth, damp with falling tears. "I thought maybe I wasn't worth more than a dog. At least dogs are cared for. At least they're wanted." The millionaire's hands clenched against the table as he listened. His sharp features softened, his gaze heavy with something unspoken: pain, perhaps. Guilt, or deep empathy. For the first time that night, silence filled the hall, not from indifference but from the weight of truth. The morning sun spilled across the mansion's garden, painting the grass with golden light. Birds sang softly, as though the storm of the previous night had never existed. The poor girl stood awkwardly by the back door, unsure if she truly belonged in such peace. She half expected someone to shout at her, to remind her it had all been a mistake. But then, the millionaire appeared, walking toward her with a calm expression. His presence was commanding, yet today, his eyes carried warmth instead of distance. "Come," he said, motioning for her to follow. Confused, she trailed behind him as he led her across the garden. They stopped near the wooden doghouse, the very place she had begged to sleep. The girl's heart sank. Was he about to send her there after all? The man looked at the doghouse for a long moment, then turned to her. "Last night, you asked for this. You begged to stay here, as though this was all you deserved." She lowered her head in shame, her lips trembling. But then his voice grew firm, steady, almost tender. "You were wrong." He stepped aside, pointing toward a small, neatly built cottage on the edge of the property. Its windows glowed with warmth, a humble yet beautiful place. He held out a set of keys. "This is yours now. You never deserved a doghouse. You deserve dignity, safety, and a chance to live again." The girl gasped, her hands covering her mouth as tears poured down her face. For the first time in years, her heart felt light, like she belonged somewhere. Everyone who watched stood in stunned silence. The poor girl who once begged for the bare minimum had been given a new life.